Everyone, and welcome to this lesson. In the previous lesson, we've been talking about numbers. We've examined the few numbers method that we have in JavaScript, and we've been able to see how you can use each of them in a different scenario depending on the instances or the needs in your program or your code. This particular lesson, we are going to be taking a look at a very important part of JavaScript numbers. We're going to be looking at JavaScript epsilon, JavaScript max value, and JavaScript main value. So the max value means maximum, and the main value means minimum value. So I'm going to start with the epsilon first. Number.epsilon is the difference between the smallest floating point number greater than 1 and 1. So what this simply means is that the number, the JavaScript epsilon value is the smallest difference that JavaScript can reliably detect between two numbers. So if you are comparing two numbers together, let's say you are adding two numbers together, as I'll be demonstrating in the browser, and then there is, a difference between the two. Epsilon can detect that small difference between those two numbers. So it is the tiny step that JavaScript can use when comparing a number. Do not forget that we have already discussed that JavaScript store numbers as a floating point. It uses floating points for numbers. So some calculation can give tiny errors. And that tiny error is the purpose of this epsilon, as it allows you to see the closest of those tiny errors in JavaScript. So the issue why this is needed is because computer cannot store decimal exactly. For example, if you are trying to add two numbers together, let's say 0.1 plus 0.2, that is an example of a decimal number. So computer cannot store it exactly. So that always gives rise to a tiny accuracies in between them. Now you may ask, what purpose can this epsilon be, used for? Like I've said, when comparing two numbers, you can use it to check if the difference between the two numbers is close enough. And another usefulness is maybe you are comparing prices. For example, let's say you are doing a shopping online, the way you see on e-commerce sites where you see the cart value 500 points, that extra that is always at the back to represent a decimal equivalent of whatever amount you are paying for what it is that you are trying to buy online. So you can use this epsilon to compare prices value. Then when you are dealing with percentages or measurement, and also when you are working with float, a calculation like the example I just gave, which I am going to, show us in the our code editor so that we'll see what I mean by that. So I'm going to pull up my editor now and explain what I'm talking about. So let me just do the usual documents for HTML and then make a short learning JavaScript numbers. Like this is our first topic, and then I do simple demo with JavaScript epsilon and we use to compare detect tiny differences when comparing numbers. Not just any number, when comparing numbers with decimal values. Like I just read to us from that slide. So I'll refresh so I can see what I'm working on. Okay, fine. Now, you see, if here I will just come here and make a script tag so that I can show you a demonstration like this. Okay, good, fine. Now, you see, one thing about this JavaScript epsilon is that it is just like when you have a toolbox, which is what number represents in JavaScript. And inside that toolbox, there is a value that you click, and that value happens to be a property of that toolbox. That is how you use it to get a value that JavaScript can present. So I am not going to do the usual way of saying let x equals to 5, and then I'll say something like let let result equals to x dot epsilon epsilon. Now like this, and do something like this: document dot right result. Now, if I do something like this, you can see what I'm getting and not defined. The reason why this is happening is because of this. If you take a look at this line, number properties cannot be used on variable. So you can't declare a variable and say you want to use it. Even though I want to check this epsilon method or epsilon property on a number, which is the built-in object for working with numbers in JavaScript, I can't use it with variable, or else it will throw that undefined error. So the way I can just use it is by calling it as a property on the number method. So I can do it this way. So this is what I call uh look at this. I said this is like a toolbox. When working with number, it's an inbuilt JavaScript object for working with number dot epsilon. Now look at it. Now you can see that just by calling it this way, I am getting a result in my browser. Now look at this. I'm seeing a very long list of numbers. So this E is the scientific notation that stands for 10, like do something like 10 raised to power something. So this is like 10 raised to power minus 16. You can imagine the minimum number and tiny differences between this. So this is how you use the uh, epsilon property on a number built-in object. And the earlier example which I gave was this, that if I have something like this, let x equals to, okay, now look at this value. Now if I print out x, this is, we expect this to be 0.3, but let me print it out and let's see what you get from JavaScript. Take a look. You can see this tiny difference, 0.000 and 4 at the back. But in traditional mathematics, this will simply give us 0.3. But in JavaScript, because it is decimal number, computer have hard time storing decimal number accurately. And that is why you are seeing that tiny difference. And that tiny difference is what you can use something like the epsilon property of numbers to get in JavaScript. So let's proceed. I think we're done with that. Now let's talk about JavaScript max value. Number.max value is a constant representing the largest possible number in JavaScript. So which means that the max value as well cannot be, the max value as well is another property of numbers in JavaScript. And that is why it said here that the number dot max value is a constant representing the largest possible number in JavaScript. So this simply means that this is the largest possible number that JavaScript can represent before it shows or becomes infinity. You remember that in the previous lesson we shown how we can get an infinity when JavaScript cannot represent a value, just gives you infinity. And what that means is that if you take a look at this, let me open up our editor and I do something like this again. I'll call the number built-in object and call max value. I think here we should be saying something. Now, this means, now imagine 10 raised to power 308. That is a very large number. So after this, JavaScript just throw an infinity, which means that if a number goes too large, JavaScript can store it correctly. And so it just gives you that infinity output as a result for working with that. And then the usefulness of this max value can be when you are trying to prevent calculation from blowing up. For example, let's say you are working with a new and you are trying to work with numbers and you don't want that number to blow up after a certain, maybe there is an error or something that can just really trigger it. Then you can use it to control it. And then if a value is too large, you use the max value to get it in JavaScript. And last but not the least is the third one, which is the main value. The number.main value is a constant representing the lowest possible value in JavaScript. Now, number property belongs to the number object. Like I said, that this number is an object. You see it's a capital N, and these are property of its main value, max value, and epsilon. This property can only be accessed as number, which means that that object needs to be called before you apply the property on it. And then using x mouse value, here x is a variable, a value will return undefined, like I have shown now. So let me just try and get a mean value, the smallest number that JavaScript can get. So I just change this to mean value, and you will see that it should change our result. This is like 10 raised to power 324 minus 324, because you can see that minus. So this E is a scientific notation that represents 10, like the way we have in normal mathematics when we are trying to do the, working with numbers or doing calculation. So these are how you work with the properties of numbers method in JavaScript, the epsilon, the max value, and the mean value to detect. Use the max value to detect the largest possible number, and use the mean value, like the name suggests, minimum, to represent the lowest possible value. The value is not always zero actually, but something that is closer to zero, which means that the difference, the tiniest difference before that number reaches zero, that is what you use the minimum value to represent. Thank you, and in the next lesson we'll continue on our number methods and then numbers in general in JavaScript.